Democracies. Despite their esteemed nature in mainstream conversation, when studying history, one finds that democratic societies are few and far between. Past millennia are ripe with accounts of how rulers authoritatively controlled their respective societies with iron fists, albeit with varying degrees of intensity. Differences considered, if there is one thing that these leaders had in common, though, it was that in spite of their power, they were all mere men. And whether kings in a palace or beggars on the street, all of us are prone to the same ailments and emotions that remind us we're not invincible. Muhammad, like him or not, was one of those notorious rulers, and his actions certainly gave him reason for paranoia, reason to have to look over his shoulder. When he wasn't busy slaughtering innocents and converting them via the sword, he was raping his captives and humiliating those he conquered by imposing on them the jizya. So naturally, multiple attempts were made on Muhammad's life, such as when some Qurayshi Jews tried to go full Looney Tunes and drop a boulder on him as he passed by. Ultimately, though, it was a Jewish woman who did Muhammad in after he was foolish enough to eat some food she had offered him after he had murdered her family. Food that obviously she had poisoned. So although it's clear his fellow man gave Muhammad more than enough to worry about regarding his life, the biggest threat for him never came from other humans, but from Allah. It doesn't take an Islamic scholar to see that when reading the Quran, Allah treats a Muslim's salvation like a moody teenage girl treats her parents any day of the week. One moment she's up, another down. Let's take a look. Verily, man is born with a restless disposition. As a rule, whenever misfortune touches him, he is filled with self-pity. And whenever good fortune touches him, he selfishly withholds it from others. Not so, however, those who consciously turn towards God in prayer, and who incessantly persevere in their prayer, and in whose possessions there is a due share, acknowledging by them for such as ask for help, and such as are deprived of what is good in life, and who accept as true the coming of the day of judgment, and who stand in dread of their sustainers' chastisement. For behold, of their sustainers' chastisement, none may ever feel wholly secure. According to these verses, no one should ever feel safe from Allah chastising them. So much so that the Quran goes even further and explains that Muslims are afraid to return to Allah out of fear that their good deeds won't even be enough. Surely they who from fear of their Lord are cautious, and those who believe in the communications of their Lord, and those who do not associate aught with their Lord, and those who give what they give in alms, while their hearts are full of fear that to their Lord they must return. These hasten to good things, and they are foremost in attaining them. Muhammad himself even confirmed the uncertainties of one's chances at paradise when he was asked about these very verses. And his answer is head-turning. I said, O Messenger of Allah, and those who give that their charity which they give, and also do other good deeds with their hearts full of fear. Is this the one who commits adultery, steals, and drinks alcohol? He said, No, O daughter of Abu Bakr, O daughter of Siddiq. Rather, it is a man who fasts and gives charity and prays, but he fears that those will not be accepted from him. According to Muhammad, it's not the deceived sinners who go around thinking they're right with God that this verse is talking about, but rather the believers who are well aware of their own sinfulness, are doing good deeds to try to get to paradise, yet still fear that they are not going to be enough. And rightly so. I mean, the Quran itself says that those considered closest to Allah have no assurance that He won't turn on them. Say, call on those whom you assert besides Him, so they shall not control the removal of distress from you nor its transference. Those whom they call upon themselves seek the means of access to their Lord. Whoever of them is nearest, and they hope for His mercy, and fear His chastisement, surely the chastisement of your Lord is a thing to be cautious of. In other words, even those considered closest to Allah have to always carry in the back of their mind the very real possibility that their God could still punish them. But hold on a minute. According to Muslims, Muhammad is the greatest example among all of mankind. Of the closest to Allah, he's sure to be number one, right? I mean, meaning that he shouldn't have to really worry about his own salvation, right? Well, while it's no secret that Muhammad was considered a sinner by Allah, It is eye-opening just to see to what extent he was reprimanded by him, often threatening to violently kill him and torment him in hell if he ever defected back to his pagan ways or went against him. And surely, they had purpose to turn you away from that which we have revealed to you, that you should forge against us other than that. And then they would certainly have taken you for a friend. And had it not been that we had already established you, you would certainly have been near to incline to them a little. In that case, we would certainly have made you taste a double punishment in this life and a double punishment after death. Then you would not have found any helper against us. And if he had fabricated against us some of the sayings, we would certainly have seized him by the right hand. Then we would have certainly cut off his aorta, and not one of you could have withheld us from him. Side note, one of Muhammad's remarks after being poisoned by that Jewish woman was that he could feel his aorta being severed. Go figure. So with all this in mind, Muhammad's own uncertainty about his salvation comes as honestly no surprise. It's seen as in these authentic hadith narrations. An Ansari woman who gave the Pledge of Allegiance to the Prophet, the Ansar drew lots concerning the dwelling of the immigrants. Uthman bin Mazun was decided to dwell with them, i.e. al-Allah's family. Uthman fell ill, and I nursed him till he died, and we covered him with his clothes. And then the Prophet came to us, and I, addressing the dead body, said, "O Abu As-Sa'ib, may Allah have mercy on you. I bear witness that Allah has honored you." On that, the Prophet said, "How do you know that Allah has honored him?" I replied, "I do not know. May my father and my mother be sacrificed for you, O Allah's messenger. But who else is worthy of it if not Uthman?" He said, "As to him, by Allah, death has overtaken him, and I hope the best for him. By Allah, though I am the apostle of Allah, yet I do not know what Allah will do to me." Narrated Abu Hurairah, when Allah revealed the verse, "Warn your nearest kinsman," Allah's messenger got up and said, "O people of Quraysh," or said similar words, "buy, i.e. save, yourselves from the hellfire, as I cannot save you from Allah's punishment. O Bani Abd Manaf, I cannot save you from Allah's punishment. O Safiya, the aunt of Allah's messenger, I cannot save you from Allah's punishment. O Fatima bint Muhammad, ask me anything from my wealth, but I cannot save you from Allah's punishment." Notice the stark contrast between Muhammad and Jesus. When Jesus came face to face with the reality of death while standing before the tomb of Lazarus, what was his message? "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" What was Muhammad's message to those around him? "I cannot save you." To be clear, although I'm not saying Muhammad should have claimed some sort of divinity here, if there were ever a time to infuse his hearers with hope and a path forward, that was his cue. After all, the whole point of his alleged prophethood was to point people to God. Instead, he just encourages them to turn to earthly things like wealth. Muhammad was no better off than the people he claimed to be sent to, and he knew it, which is why we find hadith saying that he would ask for Allah's forgiveness 70 or even 100 times a day. No Muslim should feel any sort of peace about death knowing that their own prophet never did. So now that we've made the case for humanity's sheer uncertainty in the face of Allah, how does Jesus tie into all of this? Well, when we look at how the Quran describes him, he ties in quite interestingly. Surah 19 describes one known as Zechariah, the husband of Mary's cousin, Elizabeth, as pleading for a son, as he's soon going to become old. Allah grants him this, and Elizabeth births a son who would go on to be known as John the Baptist. But Allah also goes a step further and sends a son to Mary, Jesus. But notice how Jesus is described in the verse. Surah 19:19. He said, "I am only a messenger of your Lord, that I will give you a pure boy." So here, Jesus is described as being a pure boy. Does this just mean that he was a decent kid who never really got into much trouble? Well, let's notice the different translations. Endowed with purity, a faultless son, with the character of sublimity, holiness, and piety. This doesn't sound at all like he's just another sinful and imperfect human, and Islamic scholars think so too. Here are some commentaries that interpret the verse. Al-Tabari: a child who is Zakiyan is one who is pure from sins. Al-Baghawi: a righteous son who is pure from sins. Ibn al-Jawzi: pure from sins. Al-Badawi: pure from sins. Al-Kazin: a righteous son who is pure from sins. So as we established earlier, according to the Quran, all creatures are sinful beings that are never safe from the potential punishment of Allah. Let's take a look at this verse. If Allah were to punish men according to what they deserve, he would not leave on the back of the earth a single living creature. But he gives them respite for a stated term. When their term expires, verily, Allah has in his sight all his servants. The only logical end of this verse is that anyone who is morally pure cannot be a creature. If Jesus is morally pure, how can he fall into the above category as those deserving of Allah's wrath? And if that weren't enough, Jesus is referred to as Allah's word. O followers of the book, do not exceed the limits of your religion, and do not speak lies against Allah, but speak the truth. The Messiah, Isa, son of Maryam, Mary, is only the messenger of Allah, and his word, which he communicated to Maryam, and a spirit from him. Believe therefore in Allah and his messengers, and say not three. Only in Islam do we see the very passage intended to deny the divinity of Jesus actually end up fortifying it. How can a sinful man be Allah's eternal and uncreated word? I find it ironic that the religion which tries to deny the divinity, uniqueness, and holiness of Jesus ends up affirming the divinity, uniqueness, and holiness of Jesus like it's their job. To all of our Muslim friends watching, even when attempting to snuff it out, your strongest sources still end up exalting Christ. He's eternal, sinless, and alive. Three things that Muhammad is not. If one of Islam's main goals is to dispel so-called corrupted teaching about Jesus that stem from Christianity, don't you think you should wonder why Islam ends up just affirming it? Don't you think you should wonder why Jesus is spoken of more highly than Muhammad, the alleged best example for mankind? And don't you think you should examine the bedrock of your faith if this best example couldn't even say with confidence that he himself wouldn't be in hell when it was all said and done? A lot of questions, few answers, so you've got a lot of things to think about here. I'll go ahead and leave you to it, but be sure to check back with your thoughts.